What is a classic book? What does that mean? And we don't have a board somewhere that certifies this book is now a classic based on these criteria. Publishers like Penguin put out the Penguin Classics, but those change often. And the question becomes even more difficult when you're talking about new books, at least books from the last 25 years or so. So what are the modern classics? We're going to talk about that today as we do this tag. It's called the Next Classics tag. Contemporary books that are already classics in your heart. Because it is Tuesday. It's Tag Tuesday. Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. This discussion was begun by Andrew at YCBRM in an attempt to determine which books from the current era could be classic in years to come. I was tagged by Gavin at Genre Books, and I was also tagged by Leslie at Books, Gers, and Purrs. The main prompt: list and talk about books from any genre that are published post the year 2000 that you want to be remembered as classic novels in the future. So I will do my best to abide by that. Well, actually everything I've done, I have abided by those rules. Things published after the year 2000 novels. So I've ranked them. I have 10 of these. I've ranked them from 10 to 1. 10 being what I think is the least likely of these to become a classic, although I'd still like it to be. Going to number 1, which I think is most likely to be a classic in the next 25, 50, 100 years. There are a few of these toward the top of the list that I think are already classics that will continue to stand the test of time. The others, things I would love to see as classics, but I have a lot less hope. My list, number 10, this is a book that was published in 2003. It's by Mark Haddon, and it's called The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. This is narrated by Christopher, who is a teenager who is on the autism spectrum somewhere. The title of this book comes from some dialogue in a short story about Sherlock Holmes written by Arthur Conan Doyle from the story Silver Blaze. And they refer to the curious incident of the dog in the nighttime. Christopher is a big fan of Sherlock Holmes because he's only dealing with facts, with data, not with feelings, because he doesn't understand. Christopher does not understand feelings and emotion. They don't make sense to him. And when a murder is committed of a dog in the nighttime, his neighbor's dog is killed, and Christopher goes into his Sherlock Holmes mode to understand what happened and to solve the mystery. And when he finds out who killed the dog, it makes so little sense to him that he runs away from home. The first half of the book really is the solving of the crime. The second half of the book is him running away and surviving without his regular support of his father, his teachers, his aides. I also heard the best explanation from Christopher about the Monty Hall problem. I knew about the Monty Hall problem, and nobody had been able to explain it to me the way I understood, but Christopher, in this book, he explains it, and I finally understand why you switch doors. Number 9, published in 2023. It's by Martin McInnes. It's called In Ascension. This is the story of Lee, who becomes a biologist and an ocean scientist specifically, and discovers some new life forms, or what looks like the remains of, not the remains, an existing colony of very, very old life forms from Earth, down in a deep trench, deeper than the Mariana. And she goes from there to become a space explorer, and she's tasked with using algae to create a food supply that can be grown very quickly. I would not have high hopes that this would become a classic, but it would be great if it did. Number 8, from 2015, book by Paul Beatty called The Sellout. This is a comic novel. It is satire. It reminds me a lot of, say, a Kurt Vonnegut, or it's the story of a tiny little town right outside of Los Angeles called Dickens, California, that has really poor statistics about poverty and racial inequality, and so the state of California just erases it off the map, and Dickens no longer exists. So one of the residents is trying to figure out ways to get Dickens back on the map, and another resident of Dickens is the last surviving little rascal named Hominy Jenkins. Most, if not all, of the residents of Dickens are black, and Hominy asks our protagonist to make him a slave. He wants to sell himself and become a slave, and that seems like a pretty good way to get Dickens back on the map, if it's known that slavery has been reinstituted by black people in California. It is hilarious, and it also, kind of the first time through I laughed a lot, and the next time I just thought a lot about what does this all mean. It's a fantastic satire. I would love to see this become a classic. I don't know if it will. It might just be too raw and too... Some people might find it offensive, even though it's comedy, and comedy a lot of times uses offensive ideas, offensive speech, in order to make people think. So we'll see. Number 7, from 2015, this is Max Porter's novella, Grief is the Thing with Feathers. It's about a man whose wife has recently died. He has 2 young boys, preteens if I remember right, and he is trying to cope with this loss and help his boys cope with this loss. And he is a huge fan of the poet Ted Hughes, who was married to Sylvia Plath, and he makes a lot of references to how Ted Hughes dealt with grief after Sylvia Plath died. So you get that Hughes and Plath comparison, but it's just a really solid book about ways people deal with grief and how different we are in working through our grief. Number 6 from 2018 is a book by Anna Burns called Milkman. This is set in the 1970s in Northern Ireland, and the narrator is an 18-year-old girl who is being courted by an older man who is in the IRA, maybe a hitman or something like that. A very violent person who is married as well. And so she is trying to navigate not only living in this town that is not liked by the occupying British Army, and these relationships. She has a boyfriend, or a maybe boyfriend. She hasn't committed to him. She has this new old man who wants to be her boyfriend, who wants her to be his mistress. And it's all set against the background of the Troubles. I would love to see Milkman become a classic. Number 5, this is the only work on my list that was translated into English, originally written in Bulgarian. It's written in 2020, written by Georgi Gospodinov, translated to English by Angela Rodell. It's called Time Shelter, where a doctor, a psychiatrist, is trying to help Alzheimer's patients, and so he has built a hotel, a living place for Alzheimer's patients where they can live in any decade, so that they're living in a time that they remember better than the current time. And this becomes such a popular idea that people who are not Alzheimer's patients want to do this, and eventually leads to all the countries deciding what decade they want to live in. That chapter where it goes through each of the elections of each country and tells us which decade they voted for and why. One of the best pieces of work I've read in a really long time. Number 4, I think everything from here on is currently regarded as a classic, or is certainly on the bubble, as it were. And number 4 is George Saunders' book, Lincoln in the Bardo. It's published in 2017. It's about a cemetery in Washington, D.C., where people are between lives. They're dead and living in the cemetery. Their bodies have been put in the cemetery, but they are waiting to move on to the next thing. They're in the Bardo. And one of those people is Abraham Lincoln's young son, who died. And so we see Lincoln coming in and mourning his son, and then we see all of the various spirits who are in different forms of acceptance or denial of their own deaths. A lot of them don't realize they're dead. There are so many voices in this book. It is tough to pick things out. It is really enjoyable to read. It might be more comprehensible in audiobook form. I think this one, I think it is a classic. I think it is considered by many a classic. Number 3, a book from 2013 by a prolific author, Kate Atkinson. She's written a number of novels and short stories, but I think this is her best book and probably the one that she will always be remembered for. It's Life After Life. So this is a really fascinating look at one person from a family in rural England and the different choices that she makes, or the different things that just happen, lead down different branches of what her life could be. And so we see all kinds of alternatives, and so, you know, we get to ask the questions, what if this person had died at a different time? What if this person had not gotten sick at this time? What happens if your house is bombed during the bombings of London? What happens if your house isn't bombed? What happens if you become neighbors with Adolf Hitler? All of these questions are part of the many different paths that we go down with this family. It is obviously from the World War II references that I've just made. It starts in maybe the 1920s or probably the 1930s, goes through the 40s and 50s, and just has the same character, just with different things happening in her life, for life after life after life. I think this one is a classic already. Right, another one that I think is already a classic. This comes in at number 2. It is from 2002. It is Sarah Waters and Fingersmith. So it's a story of two girls about the same age who are growing up in very different lives. One on an estate out in rural England, and the other living in poverty in downtown London, who becomes a pickpocket or a fingersmith. And it's how these two girls' lives intertwine, and we watch them grow from very young all the way up into their 20s, and the convoluted ways that they meet and interact and learn more about who they are. It is absolutely fascinating. I love this book. I think it is a classic already. Finally, number 1, this is 2 books by the same author that have some similar themes. I think one or both of these will be classics, or perhaps are classics. I definitely think the author is going to be seen as a writer of classics. It's Douglas Stewart, and his novel is Shuggie Bain from 2020 and Young Mungo from 2022. These both take place in Glasgow. They both are centered around young boys, preteen age. Shuggie Bain in the 80s, Young Mungo in the 90s. They have some different challenges, but growing up different in Glasgow in those days was not easy by any means. Douglas Stewart writes a lot of this from his own experience. These are not autobiographical, but they are based on his experiences of growing up in Glasgow and of the people that he knew in Glasgow. They are both great novels, and I think one or both are definitely destined to be classics. So there we go. There's a list of 10 books, well, 11 because I cheated. 11 novels that were written since the year 2000 that I think are or are likely to be considered classics. Thanks for watching this video, for sticking with me. Thanks to Andrew for making this tag, and to Gavin and Leslie for tagging me. So until next time, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.
Yippee-yi-yi, yippee-yi-oh, the Ghost Riders in the Sky.
And I think I'm going to delete that whole thing about that whole thing that I just said about the books and prizes and crap.